you should be able to like solo scenarios. There's the option of going in a group or solo. Same with dungeons. We expect people will want to do that. As far as raids, I think that's just going to be a challenge that's up to the players. Like maybe in small groups, less than the normal expected amount. But I mean, we're anxious to see if people are going to solo them. Like we want to see that content. We want to see that happen. Like let us know if you're up for the challenge, and if you can, we want to, we definitely want to see players trying that for sure.
We're doing it. Okay, so that's gonna happen. Okay, that was a jinx. Hey, it's Soul, and this is Warcraft Weekly, the show that likes to say that we told you so, but only sometimes it's right. You can support the channel by hitting the like button, subscribe for more coverage, and catching me live in the mornings on Twitch. So this week turned out to be pretty stacked with the Cataclysm Classic launch, there was a new alpha build, and the triage of hotfixes after the Mists of Pandaria remix launch. I admit that most of my time was spent in the remix, so I'm a little bit out of the loop on other news because I've been playing a lot, and I'll be playing more once I finish up with this weekly. So I'm not going to blame anyone if they think I'm a little bit crazy. But I did try to pay some attention to the alpha and see some of what's new. I'm going to cover that in depth over the coming days, but let's highlight some of the really cool stuff today. I'm really excited over the upcoming story mode that's coming to the new raid in the War Within. They wrote that throughout World of Warcraft's history, many of the most epic moments in our stories have been told in dungeons and raids. With the recent introduction of follower dungeons, we've been experimenting with new ways for players to see those stories, especially for those who may not feel comfortable playing within the social expectations of group environments. With story difficulty in Nirubar Palace, our goal is to offer players a way to see the epic conclusion of the Ashkehet story who may not see the end to that story otherwise. This difficulty is intended for a private party of 1 to 5 players and will allow players to face off against Queen and Sarek without the assistance of other players or followers. This encounter features reduced combat complexity and difficulty, instead focusing on the narrative elements of the encounter. Story difficulty is intended to be experienced as a one-time chapter in the game's story, but is repeatable for players who want to revisit that part of the adventure. Now, I find this to be really good in a lot of ways. It lets folks who don't find a lot of value in group content to have this option to feel through the most important bits of the story. Even after the season or the expansion is over, those kinds of players won't have to feel the friction of like really long queues or being unable to solo raid finder difficulty when that happens. There was no mention of a reward from this mode in particular, so I'm going to kind of take a stab at it and say that maybe there's going to be a quest to defeat the final boss in any difficulty, including story, so at least everyone's on the same page. Like, it would feel kind of extra if story mode was mandatory for some unique reward. So I like what I'm seeing so far, but I want to bring up like 1 or 2 concerns. Part of me feels like limiting story mode to only the last boss risks making all the other bosses feel like such a throwaway that they shouldn't even be mentioned in other parts of the story arc. It's kind of like saying that there should be fewer characters mentioned outside of raids, and that sort of limits the narrative design, I think. Story mode, I think, is going in the right direction, but for the sake of story and the characters in it, I think that at least some of the more notable bosses that might be involved with other like zone and campaign narrative stuff, I think they should be included too. It doesn't have to be all of them, of course. I mean, like, I believe in the the kind of henchman-like boss. But imagine if Garrosh was the only boss in story mode Siege of Orgrimmar, and then we missed out on Nazgrim or the Klaxi Paragons, and we miss out on the conclusions on what have been really long stories during Mists of Pandaria. Like, that's kind of where I'm coming from here. But we definitely ought to have a conversation about when this story mode will be available in the season. Now, story mode is currently planned to release alongside the final wing of Raid Finder difficulty, and they did invite us to share our feedback once it's released. Now, we're going to share our feedback now. I don't think folks need or want to wait that long to experience that concluding part of that story or any story. I kind of sort of get why they're initially doing it like this, because I think of how Season 3 and the Emerald Dream stuff went down, and parts of the story were released on like an individual reset, but not all of it. Like, they don't want to drop the whole thing in one go as if it's like a Netflix series. But it also feels kind of jank to be like, okay, we did all this story, and if I want to do the rest, I gotta wait, or I gotta get into the group finder, and I'm not even rushing to get gear. I just want to finish this quest. The time gating just sucks, is what I'm saying. I think the approach should be different. Like, I vote that Mythic difficulty and Story mode and all of Raid Finder just open up in the same week, and then design the storytelling in such a way that it makes sense by the time we get to that point. After all, right now, we complete raids like week 1 of the season without the entire story being told to us already, and these days, the way I see it, the raid is only part of the story being told. It might be the climax of it, but it's definitely not the end of it. In the past, I've resisted Raid Finder being accessible too early because it would pressure me to experience the raid for the first time in its easiest difficulty when I'd rather do it with my raid team, with my guild. Now that feeling hasn't changed, but honestly, I also need to stop, I need to get over myself, right? And stop talking about it as if it's a problem. Just let people play and take in the story, but what do you think? In lighter news, in the War Within, we can transmog our pants off. Ooh la la. This is something that transmog lovers have been asking for since we've been able to hide our other gear, so this is great news. It's another step towards greater customization, even if this might be a little bit more suggestive. But in light of this, we ought to talk about something very important, in that we've been wearing the same underpants for the past 20 years. So yeah, some champion of Azeroth still has no home and either hasn't changed their undergarments or only buys the same pair every time. So we need customizable panties. Like, what if I want to wear tights or speedos or like a G-string, or at the very least a different color? Like, these things, they started out white, believe it or not. But on a more serious note, it's a +1 for Transmog, and it revitalizes my short list of demands for Transmog in the future. So 1, they ought to do a pass on old tabards and up-res them. Like, no doubt there are folks who feel like they belong to a certain faction, like an old faction, and these dated tabards just don't look all that great on top of these new textures. 2, I want to be able to transmog gloves individually, just like we can do shoulders. Like, there are awesome looks that we can show off. Some sets, they already do pull off that kind of vibe, but adding this option will unleash the imaginations of players who want to pull off that asymmetrical look. Like, do that, and I'm in a pretty good place. One of the biggest pluses of Dragonflight going back to a traditional-ish talent system included having loadouts. So I have my loadouts for basically whatever that I tweak for more specific situations like a certain encounter. The problem for many, though, was that a character was limited to only 10 loadouts across all of their specializations, with, druids having 4, and that proved to be a kind of source of frustration. I know that part of WoW's quality of life benefits include having most of its settings and UI and macros and talent loadouts be stored server side, but it comes at the cost of being beholden to data limits, and it's kind of odd that we could store local UI settings but not talents. Whatever the case, though, the number of loadouts has been increased from 10 to 40, which is like, damn. And that should cover just about every situation, to the point where we have a loadout for a particular dungeon or a raiding counter if we want, which is really nice. Professions are still shaping up, with some of the recipes that I've mentioned in a previous video being removed, possibly in favor of being used in later seasons. It also turns out that cross-realm work orders are in fact going to be a thing, but they're going to be restricted to those who are part of the same guild, which makes sense, seeing as how cross-realm guilds are going to be a thing. But this also introduces the possibility of other ways crafting orders can be done across realms, possibly even public orders if it's done right. Now, I've talked about how the idea of requesting quality from a public work order is going to be a more viable thing to do in the War Within, and while it's not a thing yet, it's a conversation that we can at least continue. On top of that, the concentration resource appears to have been adjusted to refresh even faster than previously. Before, it took about 5 minutes to get 1 point back, and now it's about 3.5 minutes, or basically 29 hours to go from empty to full concentration, which so far makes it feel like making high rank items is going to be extremely accessible, pretty much to where maybe someone like a blacksmith can maybe spread their specializations wide and make nearly everything at maximum quality. The drawback being that they're going to fulfill fewer orders than someone who did put their knowledge into only a few recipes. But this is all ongoing. Everything can change over the next couple months, and I plan on doing a pass on gathering professions at least next week, so stay tuned. Okay, so we need to talk about the remix. I've been neck deep in it in my own brand of very degenerate behavior, but in the meantime, I've been able to kind of soak in and gain some understanding of people's reactions and circumstances, which are very different depending on their approach. The way I see it, there are 3 main features or draws of the remix. It's Transmog, it's leveling alts, and it's power fantasy, with a little bit of overlap in between these two kinds of philosophies or gameplay options. Folks who only care about Transmog are who I would call the winners of the remix. Within the first hour or so, you're on your way to buying yourself a full-ass ensemble. Maybe by the time you're level 70, you may have enough to pick up some of the rarest mounts that up until now you might have been farming these for years. And the journey there, I would say for the most part, it's interesting, whether it's your first time through Mists of Pandaria expansion or not, because there's all these, zany powers from which you can crush your enemies with ease, and if you're sticking to the outdoor questing for the most part, it's a pretty feel-good experience with enough friction that, every now and then it's going to have you reassessing your gem choices and updating your gear. At the end of the journey, too, is a big thank you gift, a ton of bronze for you to spend however you like. Folks who only care about leveling alts, I would say that it's okay. Like, I'd say it's different, and it feels good with the extra powers and using gems earned from previous characters if you wanted to use that, but for some, leveling alts might have actually been faster during other events like Turbulent Time Walking, or maybe these people are just so good at leveling in Chromie Time and Dragonflight that an event like this is like, meh, whatever. Eventually working your way to a base double experience boost, it is nice, but I've also been watching lots of players doing their part to kind of game the system by focusing on Raid Finder for extra bonuses, even kind of holding on to these experience tokens that you pick up only to use it after attaining a really high experience bonus. Personally, I never tried that method, I'm not sure how effective that is. In the case of leveling in general, it seems like your mileage is going to vary. Some are saying that it feels much faster, and some are not. Since there was a recent hotfix where your alts can finally buy accessories that you've unlocked, the early boost and the leveling overall should feel a whole lot better. Those of you who are doubling up, as in you're leveling characters to 70, and then you're using all of the bronze that you've collected to buy appearances and then just repeating the process, it's like, mwah, it's like chef's kiss. It's great. It's hard to not feel good knowing that your leveling is going to get you tons of transmog. Maybe you're saving bronze until max, maybe you have characters assigned to certain armor types or NPCs or mounts. But it's the endgame aspect of the remix that has gotten the most attention, the most drama, and those who've been participating in it, including I, have observed tons of changes, and not all of them are good. And the roller coaster is still in motion as I'm doing this recording, so I'm going to try to summarize. The remix launched with a handful of unintended farms where, and this is based on my personal conclusions, there were these really powerful farms that didn't require high gear, they didn't require a smart usage of gems, it was just a very dumb, kind of brain-dead farm of outdoor hyperspawns. A bunch of people took advantage of the most powerful spawns over in the Timeless Isle, farming frogs, and they were able to progress their character's power much, much faster than intended, having millions of health and millions more DPS to solo dungeons and raids. Now that's not a hack, anyone can eventually get there, but some say that these certain players are days, weeks, months ahead of others. Personally, I've observed it, and I'm kind of looking at it as more like kind of a week or two, but again, this is based on my own really hard grinding, and these froggers, as they're known, they got to where they're at in just a day or so, so obviously they've gotten a huge advantage. I'm also going to be honest here, I did try out frogging for approximately 70 minutes, and I earned 25,000 bronze. I did, in fact, go back and count it up, and based on my personal play habits, that was like me getting bronze 5 to 7 times faster than normal in the same amount of time. But according to a few tweets, frogging apparently is supposed to get you 60,000 bronze per hour, which is pretty insane. So not only am I a degenerate farmer doing what I did, I'm also very bad at frogging. Yay. That's enough of me though. Since then, Blizzard has been quietly nerfing all of these hyperspawn farms. They've also been rebalancing, aka nerfing other popular farms like my trash farm, where I would just farm Heart of Fear for threads and bronze, while adding also bigger bonuses to bronze for participating in group content. And just recently, they made the decision to curb some of the power of these froggers by nerfing their cloaks, but stopping short of a really big punishment like downgrading their gear, which is like taking away the bronze that they initially earned. However, kind of like bot bans, it looks like Blizzard might have been a little bit heavy-handed, with some folks reporting that their cloaks have been nerfed, even though they might have done either a very tiny bit of frog farming or none at all. On the positive side though, characters who did not make egregious use of this frog farm, which is like almost everybody, they're gonna get these new milestone quests that'll award them up to 40,000 bronze per max level character. It kind of changes this whole bronze farming meta into leveling an army of alts just for this bonus. It doesn't help with the gearing, but hey, it sounds great for farming. Now, before I attempt to share my own understanding of Blizzard's actions, I first gotta ask myself, looking back, was adding this player power component necessary in the remix at all? Like, will the lesson learned here be to just not add raids or high-end content to possible future remixes along with the grind to go with it? Part of enjoying the remix is the power fantasy while leveling, and I think in that space it delivers, especially for our alts. But the endgame side of it is definitely a grind, where the emphasis isn't to be like the most skilled at your class in order to clear this content, but more like how much you've been playing. And this whole thing feels like a social test case of how players behave when there's an available grind for power without the checks and balances, or the caps and catch-ups that we have in Dragonflight. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that power gating is objectively good or bad. I'm just pointing out that the behavior that we're seeing is a good example to bring up in these sorts of conversations. Going down this road of gaining player power basically means you choose to not collect cosmetics and you're investing heavily into gear with the hope of a payoff because hey, maybe it'll be that much easier to farm bronze afterwards, right? Maybe, sort of. The hundreds of thousands of bronze that you spend could have been going towards what you wanted all along, the appearances. So do you want to spend that 4,500 on a few transmog sets or to upgrade your helmet? And in that process of doing the upgrades, once you're done and you feel like, yeah, I'm really strong, I can farm all this stuff, then you need to farm up all the stuff. How close might you be to burnout? So that's a choice to make in the remix. Lots of folks have called for nerfing the upgrade cost, which I think is a little bit messy to implement at this stage. Like, what about the folks who had already spent a ton on upgrades, like I did? I have a feeling that after watching the more recent buffs to bronze over this coming weekend, they're probably going to consider buffing it even more because it just seems easier. It benefits everyone, but hopefully it doesn't go so far that it shifts the approach of the remix to this raid or die for bronze. The changes mean well, but it doesn't change the reality that Blizzard made a lot of oversights and didn't heed a lot of the feedback, because people knew about some of these hyper spawns, including the frogs, since the PTR. And I understand why they nerfed all of these rather than just let them run rampant, because frankly it would have ruined the remix. People would feel pressure to do the hyperspawn farms for bronze, not just for player power but also for transmog, because it was that powerful. It was more powerful than leveling multiple alts, even with these new changes. The boons from threads and gems don't mean much of anything if all you're killing are frogs or cranes. You don't need skill, nothing. And then after having bought everything, people would maybe try to level alts, and then it wouldn't feel nearly as cool because they were already done collecting transmog too, or maybe leveling via frogs is also faster. So I get it if that helps, but now we're just seeing the short-term consequences. Many groups that are going for heroic raids or Siege of Orgrimmar, they're not going to take anyone except for like the frog people. The strong are getting stronger and they're keeping the regular folks down. I mean, I'm exaggerating this a little bit, but a good number of folks in the comments are feeling like this early remix endgame is a competitive PvE hellscape. Eventually, the power balance is going to level off. Like, I expect to fully upgrade my own gear by sometime next week, and I can't wait to be called a frogger anyway. But that's why I pledge to do what I can to mostly help people out and get their heirlooms or their shoulders or achievements or, just bronze or whatever. I'll continue to offer up tips or advice to help people get started or to come out from being stuck. So, hey, ask away. But I'm going to give the following advice first. Unless you really, really want to gear up and do endgame, don't do it. Or at least don't make it a priority. Go out there and collect tons of transmog and level alts and have fun with the part of the remix that I think works well. Outside of the title that you can get and the tusks of Manaroth and the heirlooms, the reward of the endgame experience is more or less that personal journey that you went through in order to get that power before it all goes away in the pre-patch. So be very certain of what you're getting into before taking that plunge, and that's the show. I want to thank the incredible folks over on Twitch and the many new faces that showed up thanks to the Twitch drop, to our lovely patrons, and to you, viewer, for making it to the end. You fed the algorithm. Now, if you could please like the video, subscribe for more coverage, catch me live in the mornings on Twitch, and let's get out of here. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.